from Matt Watkinson. Matt Watkinson, you could argue, wrote the definitive textbook on customer experience. His first book, The 10 Principles Behind Great Customer Experience, which has won the Management Book of the Year award. When I was talking to Matt, he explained it took a little while for the publishers to get excited about this, but when they did publish this, it generated a huge amount of interest in customer experience 10 years ago, and Matt has since gone on to write 2 further books, those being The Grid and Mastering Uncertainty, looking at the mechanics of business success and decision-making in complex environments. Matt co-founded and is the chief exec of Methodical, a design studio based in California. He flew over from California just a couple of days ago, so he's shaken off the jet lag. And he's also working with a number of global brands as a consultant. Vodafone, Bupa, Telefonica, Jumeirah Group, Land Rover, and I understand the FBI. So please, let's have a big round of applause to Matt, and we're looking forward to your insights, Matt, on the 10 principles.
This is for me. All right, thank you so much. Well, thank you for having me. We should have some slides appearing, or perhaps I'm in charge of advancing that. Fantastic. Okay, thank you so much. Well, the picture on the screen behind me is of a man called Miyamoto Musashi. He was Japan's most famous and successful samurai warrior, and he wrote a book too, a little bit before me, called The Book of Five Rings. It was a training text for other warriors, and in that book he talks about the difference between what he calls a strike and a hit. A strike is a very deliberate action. It's a technique that you've mastered, that you can perform, that's going to have very conscious and consistent outcomes. Okay? A hit, on the other hand, would be kind of swinging your fists around or kicking people, hoping that you land that knockout blow on your opponent. It might work, you might get lucky, but I don't think anyone would say it's the most efficient way of going about trying to achieve your objective. And when I read this book, and I saw this distinction between the strike and the hit, I thought, this is exactly the problem that we have when it comes to improving customer experiences or the design of products and services in general. It all feels a lot more like hitting than it does striking. Okay? What I thought that we needed that would help make that improvement process a lot more efficient and systematic and more effective would be a set of principles. Right? In engineering, they have the laws of physics. What do we have when it comes to customer experience? Right? We need some psychological principles. And the result of researching that and thinking about that for a number of years based on 10 years of practice and then 3 or 4 years of structured research was this, my first book, The 10 Principles Behind Great Customer Experiences. I will go through those principles now, starting with the first, perhaps the most important, that a great customer experience is one that reflects the customer's identity. Back in the 60s, a French philosopher by the name of Jean Baudrillard was studying consumer behavior. And he said, there's really 3 types of value that come into play when we make a purchasing decision. First, we have what he called use value. What does this thing allow me to do? A fridge keeps things cold. Fairly simple. He said we have the exchange value. That's the financial aspect of it. What does it cost? Is it going to appreciate or depreciate? And then third, he said we have sign value. And sign value is, what does this thing say about me? How does it reflect my status, my social group, my identity? So it's no surprise that a lot of brands have done really well by focusing on the sign value aspect of their product or service. A great example of this would be Beats by Dre, the headphones. Tremendously successful, 40% market share in 3 years. Not probably a better product than a Sennheiser or a Bose or any of those, but a lot more sign value on account of the endorsements from celebrities and famous sports figures that conferred that sign value on the product, which is what made a lot of people decide, yeah, we want that brand in the first place, and then I'll choose which product I'm going to go for. Now, it turns out you can take this advice literally. Okay? You can literally reflect the customer's identity through the product. This is a campaign that Coca-Cola ran, where they just put random names on bottles and put them in the store. People would walk in, they'd see their name on the bottle, and they'd buy it. Right? They sold an extra 120 million, I think, of these in the UK alone. Very, very simple, reflecting the customer's identity through the product. How else might we think about doing that? Here's some more very practical ways that we could do this, right? How easy is it for the customer to identify themselves with us? Are they like a random 25-digit account number? Or is it more personal in the way that they identify? Can we demonstrate some kind of awareness of the relationship history that the customer has with us? One client we worked with, a very high-end furniture manufacturer, they sell tables that cost 70, 80,000 pounds. In the canteen in their showroom in London, they have photos of all of their highest spending customers so that anybody from any part of the business, if one of those customers walks in, can greet them by name in the store, whether they're the cleaner or the CFO or anybody, right? They're demonstrating an awareness of that relationship history. And finally, of course, very, very common, we can look at ways that we might allow people to personalize or customize that product or service. Ultimately, this comes back to how are we reflecting the customer's identity through the product, okay? So we start by wanting to know who is our customer. What do we want to know next? What are they trying to achieve? Right? And I use the wording satisfy the higher objective. To explain what I mean by that, there's a wonderful quote from Theodore Levitt, who was a professor at Harvard Business School, who said, people don't really want a drill, what they want is a hole in the wall. Right? Obviously, the drill is the product, and the hole in the wall is the goal. Okay? Now, it's easy that over time, if we work in a particular industry, or we work on a particular product or a particular service, we can lose sight of that objective, right? And we just keep incrementally improving the product or service that we already make. We keep making better drills and better drill bits, and we lose sight of that goal. And that's a problem because it can expose you to kind of serious disruption from new people entering the market, or it can blind you to opportunities to do entirely new things. Here's a fairly simple example of this. So, what's the objective of a book? Right? It's to learn from or enjoy the contents, right? Very, very simple. So what are all the other ways that you might be able to learn from or enjoy the contents of a book without having the physical thing printed on a dead tree? Right? You could have Audible. You could have Kindle. These are both enormously successful innovations that came about by ignoring the product and thinking about the higher objective. Right? So this is tremendously beneficial. It allows us to really go back to and understand the customer's true motives. Very, very important. It allows us to spot opportunities that we can't see if we're just looking at the product level of our product or service. And ultimately, what this is really all about is about creating products and services that people really want, okay? So we know who our customer is. That's step one. We know what they're trying to achieve. That's step two. So what do we need to know next? What's the third principle? The third principle is that a great experience leaves nothing to chance. Here's a simple and hopefully quite relatable example. So these are some of the things that you have to do between buying a plane ticket and getting to the airport. Okay? Anyone who's been on a foreign trip will know this, right? Typically, you check the weather, you've got to pack, make sure you haven't forgotten anything, figure out how you're getting to the airport, all these sorts of things, right? Now, I've never had help with any of these from any airline except for these two. Right? Anyone had help packing from an airline before? No? Who's taken a foreign trip and the first thing they've done is Google, what does power outlet look like in X country? Right? I've got like 1,000 of those adapters in a little graveyard at home. These are all parts of the experience of flying, but nobody thinks about them. Why can't the airline tell you the most efficient way to get to the airport terminal, or if there's roadworks? Why can't they advise you what to pack because of the weather? Why can't they tell you what your visa entry requirements are? Right? All of these things are part of the experience, but they're typically left completely to chance. Now, there's another reason that we need to know this, that we need to know what all these interactions are, and that's this, the peak end rule, which is a psychological phenomenon identified by Dan Kahneman and a colleague of his, Don Radelmeyer, back in the 90s when they were performing a simple experiment on some people who were having a medical procedure. Basically, what they did was they asked these patients, how much pain are you in on a scale from 0 to 10 for every minute during the duration of this procedure? So that might be patient A, and that might be patient B. And then after the procedure was over, they asked a second question, which was how painful was that experience overall? Okay. Now, they expected the answer to that second question to basically reflect the sum of all the individual answers that they've given before, right? Makes sense. So, obviously, patient B would have found this to be a much more painful or uncomfortable experience. But that's actually what happened in reality. What happened in reality was that the answer to that second question reflected the most intense moment, the peak, and the end, the average of these two. Hence the expression, the peak end rule. Okay? So in reality, in these kind of simple examples that I've given here, actually patient A would have found this to be a more painful experience than patient B. Right? Now to explain this, Kahneman introduces the distinction what we learn from the past is to maximize the quality of our memories, not of what we actually experience. It doesn't matter what actually happens. What really matters is what we remember of it. In other words, the term customer experience is a slight misnomer because it's not the experience that matters. We need to create better memories. Memories are where it's at. So how do we do that? Well, that's where this fourth principle comes into play. That a great experience is one that sets and then meets expectations. If you think about it, well, there's no such thing as satisfaction without expectations, is there? There's no such thing as disappointment without expectations. There's no such thing as delight, heartbreak. Everything comes down to our expectations, right? You can have a better stay at a cheap B&B than a five-star resort because one exceeds your expectations and another falls short of it, right? It's obvious. But this whole expectation thing is nobody's job, right? Look at your journey maps that you've done, if you've done them, and see if expectations are on there. They're probably not. Very, very few people think about how they go about setting or meeting expectations, even though when you think about it, it determines absolutely everything. And that's how we end up with designs like this. Heathrow's Terminal 5. So how busy is security? Can anybody tell me? Is it 5 people in the queue? I don't think so. Is it on a random scale of 0 to 10, it's like a 5? Hands up if you measure busyness in lit up men. Right, if one of your colleagues says, are you busy? Do you say, I'm like 5 lit up men? It's not very helpful at all, is it? Right, it's completely useless. What it should say is 10 minutes or 5 minutes. Right? Totally useless. Now, it turns out we don't really have an expectation at all. We have a continuum of expectations where two boundary points in particular are worth knowing. On the one hand, we have, this is what I would consider to be adequate. Okay? Maybe if I'm going for a coffee at Starbucks, I'm going to wait for 5 minutes, and then after that, I'm going to start getting a little bit frustrated. And then on the other hand, we have, this is what I would consider to be ideal. Maybe I walk straight to the front of the queue, my drink's already there waiting for me. And then between these, we have what Leonard Berry, who identified this model, calls the zone of tolerance. Right? And this is where most things happen. Most stuff is in the middle. Right? Well, why does this matter? Let's go back to this idea of memories. Okay? We only remember this or this. We only remember what was below adequate or what was beyond ideal. And there are fairly obvious reasons for that. What incentive is there for your brain to hang on to something that perfectly conforms with everything that you've already learned, right? With all of your existing past experience. You don't learn anything from it, so the brain doesn't internalize it. Now, this is like the $100 million slide, because this is why a lot of customer experience programs don't deliver any return on investment, because they take something that's kind of here, and they move it a little bit up here, doesn't have any impact on the memory, doesn't have any impact on satisfaction, doesn't have any impact on brand perception. Right? It doesn't matter if we improve it on paper, it only matters that we improve it in the customer's mind. But there's another side to this that I think is really exciting, which is that oftentimes it's just trivial, tiny, unexpected little things that lodge themselves in the mind. Right? It can actually be very cheap to transform customers' perceptions of an experience. And here's a personal example of this. So, obviously, there's not a lot that you can do to impress me with a haircut because I'm bald. Right? There's not a lot that you can do. Can't really wow me if you're a hairdresser. But whenever I go to the barber shop, what do? They take off my glasses, which I'm not wearing today. They shave my head. They give me back my glasses. I look in the mirror and say, thank you, that's wonderful. Right? But one time, in the 42 years I've been having my haircut, this one barber in Copenhagen, of all places, said, I just want everything to be perfect. And before he gave me back my glasses, he took out a little spray and a polishing cloth and he cleaned them, and then he handed them back to me. Right? This only happened once, but it's the only thing that I remember from that experience, and it's actually the only haircut that I remember. And what did it cost him to do? It basically cost him nothing. All he did was he identified one of those little bits of the experience where nobody does anything and expectations are extremely low that I was talking about a minute ago. He added in one unexpected detail and he's changed the memory of the experience. Okay? So once we've identified these things, how do we then go about improving those interactions? Okay? If we identify a stage of the experience and we think we could sharpen that up, how do we do it? Well, that's where the rest of these principles come into play, starting with something we've already heard a little bit about, ease. Right? We want things to be effortless. It's kind of central to our notion of progress, certainly kind of technologically, that things get easier over time. It's the direction of every business. Right? We want to conserve energy, it's a survival instinct. So making things easy increases the perception of value. Right? Here's my favorite example. This is Domino's Pizza. They decided that they were going to make it really easy to order pizza. Right? Really, really easy. So what do? They have a zero-click app. You launch the app, and a countdown timer begins, and unless you intervene, they're sending you a pizza. You only have to text them the pizza slice emoji. That's all you have to do. They're sending you a pizza. Right? They came up with, you can order through your car if you've got a Ford, I think. Maybe you just say pizza at your car. I don't know how it works. Anyway, the point is, extremely easy. They now sell 1 in 5 pizzas in America, and from the moment that they started really thinking about their proposition and customer experience, their share price is up 1,200%. That's a pretty good return if you'd bought low. Another wonderful example, right? No industry is spared the imperative of making things easier. Right? This is OXO's effortless jug. Now, it used to be in the Stone Age, when you put water in a jug and you wanted to measure it, you either had to crouch and look through the side, or you had to pick it up. I think we can agree that they're both quite exhausting things to do, and nobody is going to want to do that, right? So OXO have made the effortless jug. You can look straight in the top, see how full it is. And if you read the reviews of this product on Amazon or wherever, there are people saying, I would give it 6 stars if I could. It's the best thing I've ever bought. That's a little bit depressing, but the point is that people really, really love products that make their life a little bit easier. How might we do that in practice? Reduce time on task. That's step 1. Right? Step 2, look at what you might be able to do on the customer's behalf. That might just be the default values that you put in form fields. It could be taking that task on for the customer so they don't have to do it. Where are the wait times? How can we eliminate or better manage those? Right? Do we make things available in the time and place of our customer's choice? Convenience. And finally, a huge one, language. Do we use language, simple, clear, concise language that the customer understands? All of these things, very simple, proven ways to make things easy. Well, now we've made it easy, what else do we want to do? We want to eliminate stress. Nobody wants to have a stressful experience as a customer, but it finds its way in there anyway, doesn't it? Yeah. And there are 3 very, very common causes of this stress. Number 1, mistakes. When we make mistakes, we get stressed, and then when we get stressed, we make more mistakes. Right? So mistakes are a very common cause of stress. Number 2, uncertainty. We don't like to feel like we've got no idea what's going on. Or when's my package going to arrive? When's my car going to be ready? And finally, choice. Let's take a look at these in a little bit more detail, starting with this error prevention stuff. Now, you can transform most customer experiences, in theory at least, with a pencil and a piece of paper. And all you need to do is say, what mistakes could the customer make? How could we prevent those mistakes from ever occurring? And if we can't prevent them, how could we better detect that those mistakes have happened and help them to recover more gracefully? Right? If you go through this exercise, if you just pick a stage or a customer journey and you start doing this, you're going to realize that just about every experience is massively, massively error-prone, and there could be hundreds, if not thousands, of mistakes that could be avoided or prevented. And here's a bit of a weird example to illustrate just how powerful this is. So the World Health Organization thought they'd have a go at this, and they produced a very basic checklist for surgeons and nurses before they operate. Right? And it's got stuff like, do we have the right patient? Have we got the right leg? Do we know if they're allergic to anything? Right? Really, really simple stuff. And you've got to bear in mind that these are some of the most highly trained professionals in the world, right? They're surgeons and nurses. The most basic errors that you could possibly think of. How much impact do you think that had? Probably not very much, right? Well, it turned out that using this basic checklist reduced the number of deaths by 1/3 in the hospitals where they trial this. 1/3, right? Now think about how distracted your customers are, how much else they've got going on, how inexpert they are at whatever it is that you're asking them to do, how little they probably want to be doing a lot of these tasks in the first place, and you realize just how profoundly important it is to error-proof an experience, right? It can be transformative alone. What else can we do? We talked about feedback, right? We talked about uncertainty. Every experience can be improved by giving people more prompt and accurate feedback so that they know what's going on. Everybody has this product, I'm sure. Those 2 little blue ticks that tell you for sure your teenage son or daughter is ignoring you, right? Or whatever it's telling you, your message has been delivered and read. That's what makes this product great, is just a little bit more feedback. Right? If you look at your customer experience, there will be chances to give people more accurate and timely feedback on their experience, and that will create more value. Choice. A lot of people think that we want choice, but we don't. We don't really enjoy choosing. We just want the one right thing. And there comes a point at which there's so much choice, it actually creates a lot of anxiety for you. Right? A guy wrote an entire book on it. You don't need to read it because that's the book. Basically, that one sentence. Choice is bad. You don't need to read it. But what we see in practice is that most organizations, particularly online, they just put the information out there and then it's for you to decide, right? Here's our products, here's the information, you decide. But if you're not an expert, or there's a lot to choose from, or you don't really know how to choose, that's a problem. Pretty random example, but Victron Energy, they make renewable energy equipment. I need to buy some of that. Don't ask me why. But I don't have a clue what the difference is between any of their products, and they do nothing to help me. So one of the things that I would wish more companies would do, basically, is just become an ally in your customers' decision-making. Help them choose. Don't just say, here's the information. Help them to choose, okay? So we've made it easy. We've got rid of all the stress from the experience. What other options do we have? Well, we have every experience through our senses in some way. Every experience is sensory. The way it looks, the way it sounds, the way it feels, the way it tastes, the way it smells. Every experience is sensory, and our senses are a major source of pleasure for us. So thinking about the sensory dimension of an experience can be hugely important. You think about how it sounds when a car door shuts, for example, and even in unexpected ways. Right now, it turns out that when you present information to people, maybe you're writing a business proposal or something, if you just use text, people will have forgotten 90% of what you've written within 3 days. But if you combine text and pictures, like this slide, that recall goes up to about 65% after 3 days. So even the way that you think about presenting information, the sensory dimension of an experience can be hugely important. This is another opportunity for us. Speaking of pleasure, let's talk about the biggest one of all. Right? We are a hyper-social species. We're probably the most social species on the planet. There's nothing really that determines the quality of your life or your happiness than your relationships with other people, right? Whoever those other people are. So it stands to reason that thinking about the social dimension of the experience that you provide, the interactions that people have between the customer and the people working, is a tremendous opportunity. Something I was reminded of when I found myself in this tiny little town, Lenox, in Massachusetts, and I walked into this bookshop, and the gentleman came out from behind the counter. He looked me in the eye with a smile. He welcomed me into his shop. He asked me what I was doing in the town. He asked me what kind of books I like to read, what I'd read recently, and before I knew it, he was scurrying around the shop, bringing out all these books that he thought I'd love. And I left there a few minutes later with a huge stack of books and a big smile on my face, almost feeling like I'd made a new friend. And one of those books was this, Footnotes from the World's Greatest Bookshops, of which his is the first featured. Right? Just say, how can I be a host in life? Right? Be a host in life, not a guest. If you stop thinking business, customer, service provider, client, and you start thinking, I am the host, and these people in my life are the guests, right? Then you'll instinctively do all of the things that you need to do to make people feel welcomed, valued, appreciated. You'll instinctively start responding to their needs. Doesn't need to be any more complicated or clever than that. Be a host in life, not the guest, is just the golden universal rule. What have we got left? Let's have a brief recap. We know who the customer is. We know what they're trying to achieve. We know how we're going to get them from point A to point B because we've looked at all the interactions. We've solved most of our problems just with basic expectation management, which most businesses are not very good at. We've made it easy. We've got rid of the stress. We've thought about how we can make it beautiful or the sensory dimension. We've thought about social. We've got two left. Control, right? If you study just about any psychological theory or literature, one theme comes up over and over again. We want to feel in control of our lives. We want to feel like we're autonomous, like we're the captains of our own destiny. So creating experiences where people feel more in control increases the perception of value. My favorite example of this, who's been here? Anybody? Right? Who came out poor? Yeah, this is a very expensive store. And what they've done is they've created an experience where the kids are in control and the parent is just a kind of wallet-flapping passenger following them around going, no, 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 don't buy that, don't buy that. The kid chooses an empty bear, then they buy the accessories for it, then there's a little button that they press that turns on the stuffing machine. Kids are in control of this whole experience and they absolutely love it. And they have done really, really well. All right, they've sold 125 million of these things. You couldn't even fit them in here across their network of 400 stores. You see the same in B2B, exactly the same thing, right? Google ads. You get to choose who the customer is, where in the world they are, when they see the advert, how much you want to spend, right? And you don't pay unless they click. And unusually for Google, you even get to choose to talk to a human being if you want to, right? All about being in control. All about giving people a sense of control. What do we want to be in control of? When we do things, where we do them, maybe who we do them with, maybe what they look like, going back to that earlier principle of reflecting the customer's identity. These are all ways that we can put people in control. So what have we got left? A great experience is one that considers the emotions. Right? There's a very famous quote about this, that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they won't forget how you made them feel. I think we understand that that intuitively kind of makes sense, right? We've all heard this. But there's another quote that I think is even more powerful than this. For anybody who's working in customer experience or customer service, the more you want to achieve your goal, the bigger your emotional response is going to be. Right? If people either help you or get in your way, the more is at stake, the more satisfied you're going to be, or the more angry you're going to be. Right? So how do we use this? Well, we use this to prioritize the work that we're going to do. If you're a bank, for example, you probably want to prioritize the experience around something like reporting a fraud or a theft. Or you probably want to prioritize the experience about giving people mortgage approvals, for example, would be a great example, because you're stressed out, like my house is on the line here. Right? This is where you get a disproportionate impact when it comes to that memorability that we talked about earlier. And this is a fantastic slide for me to end on because it really encapsulates my entire perspective on all of this stuff. None of it's complicated. None of it's especially difficult. You just need to structure your thinking in a particular way and think about how you can apply these principles. When it comes to emotion, it's as simple as saying, what do we or don't we want people to feel? What's the emotional signature of our experience going to be? What's likely to trigger those feelings? And then based on that, what do we think needs to change about the experience? And as I say, this is the last thing I have to say. If you can take these 10 principles and you can think about applying them in a very structured way, I promise you that you're going to get the results that you're hoping for, better experience for the customer, better value, better commercial results as well. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I look forward to seeing you in the rest of the day.